자, 방금 보신 영상은 저희 지구의 사랑 회원이신 이경호 작가님의 작품이었습니다. 이렇게 영상을 통해서뿐만이 아니라 오늘 저쪽 뒤쪽에 오셨으니까 실물로도 만나뵐 수 있습니다. Ladies and gentlemen, the video you just saw was by the artist Lee Kyung-ho, who is a member of People for Earth. He not only appeared on the video, but he's here with us today, so you can meet him in person. A big round of applause and thank you once again. 자, 이제 2012년 생태대를 위한 PLC 포럼을 시작하겠습니다. We will now begin the PLC Forum for Ecozoic Era 2019. 바쁘신 와중에 멀리 춘천까지 와주신 모든 여러분들께 감사드립니다. 다행히 오는 데에 날씨도 참 좋았고 휴게소에 사람들도 참 많았습니다. 오늘 많은 이민 여러분들께서 참석해 주셨는데 차차 소개드리고 우선 대회를 시작하겠습니다. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the PLC Forum for Ecozoic Era 2019. This year, the theme is The Rights of Nature and Ecological Transformation. Our forum is being held as a part of the PLC Forum, PLZ, which stands for Peace and Life Zone. Thank you for coming all the way out to Chuncheon. We have some very special guests who have come a very long way to be with us today. We will meet them very soon. Let us now begin with the program. 자, 우선 그럼 개회사, 저희 당금실 대표님을 모셔서 개회사를 듣도록 하겠습니다. 큰 박수로 맞이해주시기 바랍니다. I will invite Ms. Kang to the stage, the Executive Director of People for Earth.
이 자리에 오신 여러분 모두 정말 감사드립니다. 특히 강원도 바쁘신 가운데 자리해 주신 우리 부지사님 또 연구원장님 감사드리고요. 가장 멀리서 오신 뉴질랜드 오클랜드대 이설만 교수님, 또 뉴욕 유엔의 마리아 산체스님, 런던의 김민 교수님, 또 이 자리를 만들어 주신 여러분 모두에게 깊이 감사드립니다. 이 자리는 강원도와 인제군, 양구군이 공동 주최하는 PLG 페스티벌 음악제의 복합문화제 일환으로 마련됐습니다. 강원도는 많이 아시겠지만 남북한이 걸쳐 있고요. 또 분단으로 인해서 가장 피해를 많이 받은 지역입니다. 특히 인제군, 양구군은 접경 지역입니다. 지금 강원도는 이러한 불행을 생명과 평화의 희망적 선포로 바꾸고자 DMZ를 Peace and Light Zone, PLG로 새로운 이름을 붙이고 메시지를 전달하고자 이 페스티벌을 시작했습니다. 저희는 이 PLG 포럼에서 생명과 평화가 공존하는 아름다운 지구 공동체 시대를 생태대라고 불러봅니다. 그리고 이 꿈을 차근차근 실현하기 위한 여러 가지 노력을 함께 하고자 여러분께 약속을 드리고 또 함께 하고자 동참을 희망합니다. 21세기인 지금 우리는 20세기 마지막 전쟁, 세계전쟁, 국제전쟁이라 할 수 있는 6.25 한국전쟁 이후 21세기 지금 우리는 국가 간의 전쟁을 넘어서 인간이 일방적으로 지구를 약탈하고 다른 생명들을 무참히 사륙하는 일방적 전쟁의 한가운데 있다는 것을 각성하고 있습니다. 그 결과는 인류의 생존 자체를 위험하는 자가당착으로 돌아오고 있습니다. 저희는 이런 의미에서 PLG는 한반도 분단의 해소, 동아시아의 평화를 넘어 지구를 존중하고 다른 존재들과의 관계 재설정이 있어야만 가능한 미래지향적인 생명 평화론이라고 보고 있습니다. 보통 지속 가능한 삶을 많이 얘기합니다. 저희는 인간의 지속 가능한 삶은 인간을 낳아준 우주와 지구에 대해서 한 점 부끄럼 없이 살려는 매일매일의 노력이 지속될 때 가능하다고 보고 있습니다. 이 포럼을 주관하는 지구와 사람은 2015년부터 생태대를 모색하는 지식 공동체로 작게 시작을 해서 5년째 컨퍼런스를 이어왔고, 이것이 오늘 PLG 포럼의 기초가 됐습니다. 사실 어떻게 보면은 아직 한국 사회에서도 많이 익숙하지 않은 이 생태대의 비전 또는 생명론이라는 낯선 논의, 또 별로 관심이 없는 논의에 꾸준히 함께 해오신 여러분, 지구와 사람 멤버들 여러분 모두의 노고에 정말 깊이 감사드리고, 오늘 이 자리를 빌어서 많은 분들과 함께 큰 흐름으로 전환하는 중요한 여건을 만들고자 합니다. 마지막으로 지금 세계적으로 유엔을 중심으로 국가 기후변화에 대응하기 위한 국가 지도자들의 정상회담이 개최될 예정이고, 오늘부로 내일부로 전 세계 기후행동 시위가 열리고 있습니다. 서울에서도 내일 오후 3시에 대학로에서 기후행동 시위가 시작됩니다. 이 절묘한 시기에 지구와 사람의 파국을 막기 위한 어떠한 노력을 우리가 함께 고민하고 실천할 것인지, 오늘과 내일 춘천에서 좋은 또 고귀한 소중한 의견들이 많이 교환되고 실천으로 나갔으면 좋겠습니다. 감사합니다.
네, 교회자 감사합니다. 다음은 김성호 강원도 행정부지사님을 모셔 환영사를 듣겠습니다. Next, I invite Mr. Kim Sung-ho to the stage. Mr. Kim Sung-ho is the Vice Governor of Gangwon-do.
예, 안녕하십니까. 행정부지사 김성호입니다. PLG 페스티벌 생태문명 국제 컨퍼런스 개최를 진심으로 축하드립니다. 이런 기원 행사를 우리 강원도에서 준비해 주신 우리 강금실 장관님, 그리고 임미정 이사장님께 감사를 드립니다. 그리고 바쁘신 중에도 자리에 함께 해주신 안병옥 차관님, 그리고 강원연구원장님께 감사를 드립니다. 그리고 또 멀리서 해외에서 같이 자리를 해주신 이리나 부코바 사무총장님, 그리고 기조연설을 해주시는 클라우스 보셀만 교수님께 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 잘 아시는 것처럼 저희 강원도는 세계 유일의 분단 도이자 또 비무장지대를 직접 접하면서 더 생생하게 분단의 아픔과 긴장을 체험해 왔습니다. 특히 지난 70여 년간 비무장지대는 본래의 의미와는 달리 첨예한 대결과 군사적 위험이 상존하는 그런 지역이었습니다. 그러나 지난해 평창 동계올림픽을 계기로 시작된 남북 화해 모드는 남북 정상회담, 그리고 북미 정상회담, 그리고 지난번 판문점의 남북미 정상회담으로까지 이어져 왔습니다. 이제 강원도는 남북 평화 시대를 맞이해서 평화의 발원지이자 평화 시대의 중심으로 또 부각되고 또 그 역할이 기대되고 있는 상황입니다. 이러한 시점에서 DMZ를 피스 앤 라이프 존으로 새롭게 인식하고 생태적 전환을 향한 공유와 모색을 위해 열린 PLG 포럼이 더욱 의미가 있다고 생각을 합니다. 오늘 컨퍼런스를 통해 평화의 시대를 맞이해서 DMZ를 새롭게 바라보기 위한 심도 있는 논의들이 활발하게 진행되기를 기대합니다. 다시 한번 PLG 페스티벌 생태문명 국제 컨퍼런스 개최를 진심으로 축하드리며 함께하신 모든 분들의 건승과 발전을 기원합니다. 감사합니다.
네, 김성호 부지사님 환영사 감사드립니다. 다음은 이리나 보쿠바 여사님을 모셔서 축사를 듣도록 하겠습니다. 보쿠바 여사님께서는 전 유네스코 사무총장을 역임하셨습니다. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Irina Bokova to the stage. Ms. Bokova is the former Director General of UNESCO. Please welcome her with a big round of applause.
dear Professor Kank, dear Professor Im, Professor Bosselman, dear Vice Governor, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here. I would say I'm honored to be here. And if you allow me, on a personal note, to say that I'm coming very often to Korea, being now the Honorary Dean of the Humanities College of the Kyunhee University, and Miwon Professor at Practice. And I mention this because just yesterday, at Kyunhee University there was a major forum, the annual Peace Bar Festival, that was dedicated to climate change, to the climate justice, under the topic of Save the Earth, Make the Future. And your conference today, for me, is a natural continuation of the debate that we had yesterday. And the topic resonates deeply with my experience as Director General of UNESCO for 8 years, because I had the privilege of working with the former Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, your eminent compatriot, who came yesterday. Once again, we were together at Kyunhee University, speaking about the urgency of the climate change, of protecting the biodiversity, and also reminding us about very important frameworks, platforms, which is, of course, the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, that we have all been working together, linking it closely with the Paris Climate Agreement, that is also one of the topics that the current Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, is convening a big summit this Monday. And I think all this sense of urgency that we feel nowadays has to inspire us also, to guide us to take very, very concrete measures. And I'm very happy because this conference also is linking the protection of nature, this ecological transformation, with peace. And being here, of course, in the Republic of Korea, we should speak about peace, and we should try to find ways to enhance the inter-Korean dialogue, and also to look at the way to protect the biodiversity and nature. Because the challenges do not know geographical or political borders, be it the loss of biodiversity or the climate change. And on Monday, last Monday, I had also the pleasure of participating in another conference, which was very close to the DMZ, again, in Yancheng, in the very interesting Museum of Prehistory, to speak about what are these foundations of peace that we can look from the point of view of protection of nature. And I would like to congratulate most sincerely the government of the Republic of Korea for the last initiative. Apart from inscribing most of the part south of the DMZ as a biosphere reserves, which is already a fact since April this year, there is another major initiative to start the negotiations with North Korea to possibly inscribe the DMZ on the World Heritage List as both a natural and cultural site, because it contains 5,000 species untouched by human hand, accidentally, but also 107 which are under protection. And this incredible biodiversity has to be protected and preserved. But this initiative goes beyond, I would say, this nature's transformation, ecological transformation. If it happens, it will be an incredible tool for peace. This dividing line will transform into a uniting zone where researchers, environmentalists, scientists, local authorities will work together on a long-term basis. So I think once again, peace, biodiversity and climate are closely linked, and I would like to wish to your conference a lot of success to find new paths to enhance the inter-Korean dialogue and finally enhance peace. Thank you.
Thank you for the congratulatory speech, Mr. Tae-bang. 오늘의 마지막 축사는 국가기후환경회의 운영위원장이신 안병옥 차관님께서 해주시겠습니다. Next, I would like to invite Mr. An Byung-ok to the stage. He is the Chief of Committee, the National Climate and Environment Council. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
예, 여러분 안녕하십니까? 국가기후환경회의 운영위원장 안병옥입니다.
2019년 생태대를 위한 PLG 포럼 개최를 축하드리면서 포럼을 준비해 주신 강원도와 또 양구군, 인제군, 또 우리 지구와 사람, 강원문화재단, 하나를 위한 음악재단에 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 자연의 권리와 생태적 전환을 주제로 이번 포럼이 열리게 되는데요. 저는 이 포럼이 정말 이제 뜻깊은 것은 우리 강금칠 대표님도 말씀하셨습니다만 9월 23일 이제 얼마 남지 않았습니다. UN 기후행동 정상회의를 앞두고 세계 곳곳에서 기후 위기의 절박성을 알리는 그러한 움직임이 거세게 분출하는 그런 시기에 이 포럼이 열리기 때문에 더욱 의미가 깊다고 생각합니다. 최근 정치 분야, 경제 분야, 또 사회 분야를 막론하고 모든 영역에서 불확실성을 이야기하는 사람들이 굉장히 많아졌습니다. 그 이유는 우리가 예측할 수 없는 위기에 직면해 있고 그 위기의 파급력이 특정 국가의 경계를 벗어나서 지구 공동체 전체로 파급될 수 있다는 불안감 때문일 것입니다. 물론 역사 속에서 위기가 존재하지 않았던 적은 없었습니다. 지금까지 인류는 위기를 극복하면서 진보해왔던 것도 사실입니다. 그렇지만 지금 우리가 맞닥뜨리고 있는 위기와 과거에 경험했던 위기 사이에는 큰 차이가 있습니다. 과거의 위기들은 대부분 제도의 위기였다고 생각합니다. 제도의 위기는 민주주의의 위기, 또 분배와 재분배의 위기와 같이 정치와 경제 제도의 위기를 말합니다. 과거에는 자본주의의 위기를 값싼 에너지와 자원, 기술 진보, 풍부한 노동력을 통해서 극복할 수 있었습니다. 일시적인 후퇴는 있었지만 지난 20세기를 처음부터 끝까지 관통했던 것은 경제의 비약적인 성장이었습니다. 성장주의의 지배 속에서 중요한 것은 성장의 한계가 아니라 한계의 성장이었고, 제도의 위기는 기술 혁신과 제도의 수선을 통해서 극복 가능한 일시적인 위기로 인식되었습니다. 하지만 우리는 지금 전혀 다른 종류의 위기와 마주하고 있습니다. 제도의 위기 배후에 도사리고 있던 실존의 위기가 전면에 등장하고 있다는 것입니다. 실존의 위기는 더 말할 필요도 없이 존재의 소멸 가능성을 말합니다. 전 세계 인구의 삶을 떠받치고 있는 자원과 에너지, 토지의 이용이 이미 자연이 제공하는 기본적인 지원 체계의 범위를 훨씬 넘어섰다면 그것은 이미 제도의 위기를 벗어난 것입니다. 실존의 위기에는 제도의 위기도 당연히 투영되어 있습니다. 하지만 그 뿌리는 제도의 위기보다 훨씬 깊고 치명적입니다. 문제는 자연의 시간과 인간의 시간이 다르다는 것입니다. 사막화라든가 또 빙하가 녹는 문제, 또 해수면이 상승하는 문제와 같은 기후위기는 몇십 년, 몇백 년에 걸쳐서 진행되기 때문에 우리는 일상에서 그 실체를 정확히 파악하기가 어렵습니다. 하지만 보이지 않는다고 해서 실체가 없는 것은 아닙니다. 기후위기는 폭염이나 해수면 상승과 같은 기상학적이고 물리적 위기만을 뜻하는 것은 아닙니다. 기후위기의 최종 종착역은 지구 시스템 전체의 파국이기 때문입니다. 그래서 기후와의 전쟁에서 영원한 승자는 없고 오직 패자만이 있을 뿐이라는 사실을 인식할 필요가 있습니다. 실존의 위기가 곧 자연의 위기이고 그것이 인간에 의해 초래된 것이라면 무엇보다도 자연과 인간의 관계에 대한 우리의 인식에 문제가 있었음을 인정하지 않을 수 없습니다. 오늘날 생태 위기의 뿌리로 간주되는 근대 자연과는 전체가 개별 요소들의 합으로 환연된다고 여기는 개체론의 바탕을 두고 있습니다. 자아와 타자, 주체와 객체, 차안과 피안을 구분하는 이원론적 사유체계는 인간의 문화와 자연에 대한 도식적인 이해를 낳았습니다. 인간의 문화는 주체로, 자연은 객체로 자리매김되면서 자연은 인간의 목적 실현을 위한 도구적 가치만을 지니는 존재로 전락되었던 것입니다. 이제 우리는 이원론적 사고에서 벗어나 인간은 지구의 일부이고 지배자가 아니라는 사실을 받아들여야 합니다. 지구를 파괴하는 것은 곧 우리 스스로를 파괴하는 것임을 자각해야 합니다. 우주선 지구호의 적재량을 무한대로 늘릴 수 없다는 생태학의 가르침에 귀를 기울여야 합니다. 그런 점에서 지구의 정복자가 아니라 수탁자로서의 우리 자신과 국가의 의미를 성찰하고 기후위기에 맞서기 위해서 지구 거버넌스의 새로운 지평을 모색하는 이번 포럼의 의미는 매우 크다고 할 수 있겠습니다. 더구나 이번 포럼에서는 DMZ의 미래에 대해서도 논의하는 것으로 알고 있습니다. DMZ에 대한 접근은 자연의 황폐와 인간의 존엄성 상실 등 발전주의가 남긴 상처를 치유하는 작업입니다. DMZ가 지닌 가치의 실체적 요소는 전쟁과 죽음의 현장을 생명의 지대로 탈바꿈시킨 자연에 있음을 잊지 말아야 할 것입니다. 또한 수많은 상처와 아픔을 간직한 주민들의 삶과 기억에 있음을 기억해야 할 것입니다. 마지막으로 다시 한번 강금실 대표님과 김성호 부지사님을 비롯해서 이번 포럼을 준비하신 모든 분들께 감사드리고 이리나 보코바 전 유네스코 사무총장님, 기조강연을 해주실 클라우스 보셀만 교수님, 그리고 제가 늘 존경하는 강대인 원장님도 참석해 주셨는데요. 강대인 원장님과 오늘 토론 사회와 발표, 토론을 맡아주실 모든 분들의 건강과 안녕을 기원합니다. 감사합니다.
네, 안표학회장님 축사 말씀 감사드립니다. 자, 이렇게 해서 오늘 개회 순서가 거의 마무리가 되었는데요. 오늘 개회사 화양사 축사해 주신 귀빈뿐만 아니라 두 분 더 제가 잠시 소개를 할까 합니다. 강대인 대화문화 아카데미 원장님께서 와주셨습니다. I'd like to introduce Mr. Kang Dae-in, who is the Executive Director of Korea Dialogue Academy. 뿐만 아니고 육동한 강원 연구원장님도 와주셨는데요. I would like to introduce Mr. 육동한, the President of Research Institute for 강원. 그리고 생각을 해보니까 제가 인사를 안 드린 것 같습니다. 저는 오늘의 사회를 맡은 김고은이라고 합니다. 저 역시 지구와 사람 회원이고요. 아까 말씀드린 그 김경호 작가님과 마찬가지로 초창기부터 지금까지 저희 모임이 조금씩 커가는 거 기쁜 마음으로 지켜보고 있습니다. 그럼 오늘 프로그램 간단하게 소개를 해드리겠습니다. 앞으로 약 50분간 클라우스 버서먼 교수님을 모시고 기조 강연이 있겠고요. 한 30분 정도 커피 브레이크로 머리를 식힌 후에는 제1세션이 있겠습니다. 주제는 지구 거버넌스의 새로운 가치와 정치의 새로운 가능성으로 발제와 라운드 테이블이 있습니다. 그래서 이렇게 세션 1은 6시쯤 끝나고요. 저희가 이렇게 학구적인 활동만 하는 게 아니고 이 지구와 사람이 이 낭만과 그런 것도 아는 모임이라고 제가 말씀드릴 수 있습니다. 환영 만찬 후에는 저희가 야외에서 또 환영 행사가 마련되어 있습니다. 시와 노래가 있는 시간이 되겠는데요. 빠지지 말고 꼭 참석 부탁드립니다. I would like to briefly go over today's program. We will start with a keynote speech by Professor Klaus Bosselman, who is from New Zealand, all the way from New Zealand, University of Auckland. The keynote speech will last for about 15 minutes. After that, we'll have a coffee break for 30 minutes, and session 1 will begin at 4 p.m. The theme will be the new values of Earth governance and the transition of East Asia. There will be presentation and also roundtable discussion. At 6:30, there will be a welcome dinner, and please join us for the welcome event of poetry and a bit of singing. It will not be all academic. We will have something festive at the end of the day, so please be with us all the way to the end. Thank you. 자, 그러면 이번에는 클라우스 버스먼 교수님을 모시겠는데요. 이 기조 강연의 사회는 저희 멤버이신 최선호 변호사님께서 진행해 주시겠습니다.
네, 안녕하십니까. 저는 포럼 지구와 사람에서 토마스 베리 강좌 진행을 맡고 있는 최선호 변호사입니다. 반갑습니다. 네, 지금부터 오클랜드 대학 법학과 교수이자 뉴질랜드 환경법센터 소장이신 클라우스 보셀만 교수님의 환경수탁자로서의 국가라는 기조강연으로 생태대를 위한 PLG 포럼 2019 자연의 권리와 생태적 전환의 문을 열겠습니다. 저는 정치 생태학의 고전이 된 보셀만 교수님의 저서 법에 갇힌 자연 대 정치에 갇힌 인간이라는 책을 통해서 교수님의 명성을 알고 있었습니다. 네, 어제 유재에서 처음 배웠는데요. 예, 영광입니다. 예, 강연에 앞서서 교수님의 양력을 간단히 소개해드리겠습니다. 클라우스 보셀만 교수님은 국제법, 환경법 전문가로서 판사와 변호사, 법학교수를 거쳐 독일 연방정부와 유럽연합, 그리고 유엔 환경법 장관으로 일했습니다. 베를린에서 환경법 연구소를 설립했고 독일과 뉴질랜드 녹색당 공동 창설자이시기도 합니다. 1988년부터 뉴질랜드 오클랜드 대학 로스쿨에서 환경법과 국제법을 가르치고 있고 1999년에 뉴질랜드 환경법 센터를 설립해서 소장을 맡고 계십니다. 또 세계 자연보전연맹 전문가 그룹 의장과 지속가능한 통치 프로젝트의 코디네이터, 지구 생물권 윤리 프로젝트의 일원으로 일하고 계십니다. 2015년에 어스 거버넌스를 출판한 뒤로는 지구적 공유지 보전을 위한 강제력 있는 지구 중심 거버넌스를 주창해 왔습니다. 이제 교수님을 모시고 지구적 정책을 위한 새로운 프레임인 지구 거버넌스론에 대해서 듣도록 하겠습니다. 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply honored and it's a great pleasure being here. And thank you very much for the welcoming words. Thank you very much, Mrs. Kang, for inviting me. Thank you very much, all those wonderful people that I had the pleasure to meet over the last few days. I feel very much at home, if I may say so, here in Korea, in particular, here in this environment of people for Earth, spiritually and intellectually. Obviously the name indicates people for Earth. We're not just saying so, we're not just environmentalists, we take Earth seriously. And to put my topic of today, Earth governance, a little bit in context. Of course, Earth, when did we start thinking about Earth as our living space that we ought to take seriously in terms of looking after Earth, caring for Earth, being guardians for Earth? I suggest humanity has always had a relationship with Earth in that sense, but we seem to have forgotten our deep responsibilities that we have for the land, for life on Earth, and for Earth herself. In more recent times, however, since I've been interested and active in the environmental movement, I was intrigued by the fact that a number of government officials and lawyers took some interest in Earth as a subject. And you see, as a lawyer, you're not naturally a visionary. I like to think of us as environmental lawyers as people who have their feet on the ground and the head in the sky. So we really want both, right? We want to be realistic but equally visionary. And personally, I have a strong association with the Earth Charter. This is the introduction to the notion of Earth in the context of law and governance back in 1992, when the, I would say, rather failed Earth Summit in Rio. Nevertheless, at the time we noticed it was, a good start, but as it turned out, it wasn't. But we found an early answer. This is a network of many environmental organizations. UNESCO got involved later on, working towards what has initially been proposed by the Brundtland Report, the first major report by the United Nations to investigate what then later became known as the concept of sustainable development. It was part of the message of this report to call for an Earth Charter, which did not come about, but it happened so during the Rio 92 summit, the Secretary General at the time, Maurice Strong, called upon us to start drafting and thinking about an Earth Charter. And right from the start, and this is why I'm mentioning it, it was meant to be to continue unfinished business of states. States should have been more proactive than what they actually ended up to do in 1992 and later on. So the Earth Charter was really a creation, which I'm personally very proud of to be part of civil society. Arguably the first document globally that was crafted by a wide range of religions and cultures across the world to eventually being adopted in 2000 as a leading document for all of us to be guided by, and particularly states. Just very briefly, it's not my topic, but just as a background against Earth governance, the key principles of the Earth Charter: number one, care and respect for the community of life. You notice a non-anthropocentric approach. We are all members of the community of life, not just the human community. Number two, the preservation of the integrity of ecological systems must be a prime overarching objective of all of us. I repeat, preserving the integrity of Earth ecological systems. Number three, concern for democracy and peace, and also human rights and social and economic justice. So these are the guiding ideas, but you know the priority was with Earth, our connection with Earth. And then we encourage, in fact we have to fit in our social and economic systems in the parameters in what Mother Earth has to offer us. So there's a strong sentiment behind the Earth Charter, but equally claiming to be practical, being a hands-on document. So there you have it. You have an effort between an inspirational document. It creates our vision about Earth, to take Earth seriously, and then equally taking specific steps to make it happen. Earth governance, therefore, is one way of making some progress. In this instance, I think one of the key areas is, of course, key challenges for times ahead, is to reconceptualize the most basic instrument that we have as human society, that we are governed by and that we govern through, called the nation state. And I'm going to argue that the nation state of the 21st century needs to be understood in different terms than when it was created in 1648 under the Westphalian Treaty. The notion of trusteeship is, of course, at the key of the argument to say that states should understand themselves as having a fundamental trusteeship responsibility towards human beings and towards Earth. I start with the observation that we are all familiar with, but I can't resist. Albert Einstein, of course, famously defined insanity in this way, and I consider the insanity in our instance as being trying to continue to find a compromise between environmental needs and economic demands. This is, of course, the mainstream typical approach that we are trying to make decisions under, whether domestically or internationally. And states are, of course, keep trying this, climate change negotiations and so forth. If you take it from the lens of Earth for a minute, you would consider this insane, trying to negotiate some compromise between the functioning and the integrity of ecological systems, or the ecosystem Earth on the one hand side, and human needs on the other. So this insanity, however, is systemic. It's not to blame individuals, but we have created the institutions under which we are guided. So we need to do some serious thinking. I think the urgency has been missing, in a sense. The urgency is very clearly articulated, of course, by young people these days, and with respect to climate change, by poor people, but ultimately by all of us, as we are exposed to strange weather patterns and droughts and floods and so forth. So the climate crisis, so-called crisis, is something we're experiencing on an almost daily basis, and yet there seems to be missing a sense of urgency in that we find that, you know, how clear can you be? We are still not progressing from this cartoon that's, I think, now 20 years old, right? So we have a very clear message there. Scientifically and emotionally and spiritually and rationally, we know that we are on a dangerous course. We are destroying Earth, and yet we have this sort of instinct reactance, particularly on the part of members of the corporate sector and of members of governments and negotiators, to somehow not wanting to fully accept it, and rather having more explanation, having more understanding. And I'm not speculating on the psyche of these people, whether they are serious enough or not, but my point is there is still a sort of sense of urgency missing. We have it, of course, starting today, and hopefully the next week will be sort of another little shake-up for the human community with the beginning of global climate strikes. Today, Friday, of course, millions of people are demonstrating in thousands of cities around the world. And this example here, at a closer look, I think brings it to the point. Climate change, yes, but system change in order to overcome the climate crisis. We have not only to see the connections between climate change and biodiversity loss and the collapse of other ecosystems, including oceans, in context and interconnected. We also have to equally revisit some of the key instruments under which we are operating, not the least political institutions. So going back to the history as indicated, the modern concept of state sovereignty is a creation of a very peculiar situation in 1618 to 1648 in Europe. If you just think back for a little bit, this was a disastrous and traumatic experience, no doubt, where almost half of the population of Europe was decimated through civil war. Not to an ordinary war, civil war. You couldn't tell who your foe or your friend was. And after this total collapse of what you could say civilization, there was a successful attempt to really be serious with an effort to make peace, where we can identify those who are responsible and those who are actually responsible to govern, and having them guided under certain principles, what then became known principles of international law. The core idea being that a territory needs to be sovereign, needs to be capable to exclude any influences from other territories, and equally not interfere with the internal affairs of other countries. So far, so good. It has probably helped Europe for a while, not that it lasted for too long, but you also have to see the dark side right from the start. We have a peace order in Europe in 1648, based on the new concept of sovereign nation states, and this coincides with the so-called conquest of the entire planet. Colonialism and state sovereignty have to be thought together. There were very clear tools to discover new territories and establish trade links and take possession of other territories, then be seen to be perfectly legal under the concept of the European understanding of what constitutes a nation state. What this also means, of course, seems to be an inbuilt mechanism of this understanding that European states at the time have some kind of right to expand their influences to other parts of the world without even being asked to do so, but rather simply helping themselves. So this tool is crucially important. In our context here, we have to see also the direct relationship between sovereignty, territorial sovereignty, and property. Both are, of course, again, European instruments, legal instruments, since Roman times. What it then leads to, I can illustrate a little bit further by showing the environmental impacts of this kind of perception that the state is only responsible for itself, but not responsible to any other entity. We have the reaffirmation of this core principle of international law in the Rio Declaration that I mentioned earlier. In Article 2, it says that states have, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the principles of international law, the sovereign right to exploit their own resources, pursuant to their own environmental and developmental policies. In clear terms, that means you can do whatever you like with your territory. There is no inbuilt obligation to protect the environment. You can exploit, but there's no inbuilt obligation to protect. Yet, of course, the next sentence reads somewhat differently. The responsibility to ensure that activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. This sounds good. That looks like a responsibility to also be mindful of the impacts to neighboring states and ultimately the entire planet. You could even go further and suggest Article 7, saying that states shall cooperate in a spirit of global partnership to conserve, protect, and restore the health and integrity of the Earth's systems. There you have it, pretty clear language. Unfortunately, this is not the full story. The full story is that the first passage is a reaffirmation of the fundamental principle of international law. It is existing and executed on its own terms. It's legally binding, whereas the other two are not. They are so-called soft law obligations, if you like, moral obligation, visible in the fact that the whole Article 2 and 7 appear in a soft law document. You would not find any legally binding treaty that would require states to take responsibilities towards other states and for, in fact, the global commons and the Earth at large as a legal enforceable obligation. When I say legal enforceable obligation, conceivably this would be enforceable domestically through citizens who are not happy with climate change, for example. You have then a right to sue your own government for not providing the fundamentals of environmental protection. And you would have internationally a far more ambitious court system and judicial system overseeing this mechanism that states have certain fundamental obligations. They do not exist as legal obligations, they are there as, if you like, as sentiments. This is not to say that these sentiments and moral underpinnings are taken seriously, maybe they will, by some countries perhaps more than by others. But in order to have an understanding of the state, to see the protection of the Earth as a whole as a fundamental obligation, we simply do not have. Before trying to answer the question then, what are our responsibilities, and particularly obligations, trusteeship obligations of the state, let's ask a very basic question: who owns Earth? I think this is always a good starting point, and it's not as easy as it sounds. Of course, spontaneously we would say Earth belongs to all, or to all of us, or maybe none of us, which is true in a very basic sense. Earth is our home, this is our living space, our habitat, and end of the story. We all own Earth. Along with non-human beings, we all own Earth. It becomes more awkward when we employ law in this context, because the concept of legal ownership is associated with power and control. So we can speculate a little bit and ask the question, who owns this planet Earth really? To start with, if we just observe the facts of 123 million acres of land available to all of us, currently 7.3 billion, theoretically about 5 acres per person, pretty good. And if we all sort of organize it well, right, space-wise and time-wise, we might be getting there. In an ideal world, that might be a little bit, might be possible, of course, but we are guided by certain ideas and legal legacies and so forth, and therefore we have to observe some other things at this stage, asking the question again, who is the legal owner of Earth? And it's not overstating too much to say that 1/6 of the planet is actually owned by one person. That's Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, and her successors. After all, she is the head of 32 countries, and also the head of a Commonwealth of 54 countries, and as such, you know, legally speaking, she has kind of ownership. Of course, the way how it's constitutionally arranged does not bestow her in any way to have a say, right, in how you use the various territories of Her Majesty's empire. But rather, all the states are autonomous and they own the land in more legal terms. And I just take two examples. The second largest country in the world, Australia, and the third largest country in the world, Canada. They also happen to be one of the worst, worst environmental, shows some of the worst environmental performances per capita, right? This famous list. New Zealand is not much better, by the way, which is number 5 or 6. Of course, US number 1. So they're not very impressive in terms of using their land or the ecological footprint per capita. But you know, in the case of Australia, we are looking at large-scale coal mining. In the case of Canada's oil sands exploitation. You know the story of both these phenomena, how they largely base their economies on the export of coal and oil, which they themselves do not need, and thereby quite happily taking advantage of a legal hole. You know, you just sell your coal to China and they do it for you, they burn it, and the victims are the atmosphere to start with, and oceans and others. You just simply export your emissions. You can perfectly do so legally. This is called trade, and this is called state sovereignty. There's no responsibility there. However, it can be rather impacting if we just, again, look at the legal ownership as a phenomenon that constitutes power and control. We can observe that 196 states own their properties in that sense, without any desire to control their own territorial activities, to not go across their national boundaries and avoid any export of waste and pollution. The reality is, of course, this happens large scale. There is this phenomenon that's called the externalization of waste and pollution, either in legal terms, you have trade arrangements or commercial contracts, say with African countries and companies in Africa to deal with your waste, electronic waste and others, or you don't have kind of commercial contracts, you just do it because you can. Because jus nullius means a thing that does not matter legally. The atmosphere has no defense mechanism. The oceans do not have any defense mechanism. We can them literally or legally speaking see as rubbish dumps. And the only reason why we would not do it in full is somehow of course, the insight of governments to negotiate some deals under which we restrict ourselves to an extent, but the emphasis is on negotiating. So we're negotiating somehow, assuming that we can find a compromise between the pollution of our oceans and the atmosphere and so-called economic and social needs. So really, state sovereignty, in essence, is the exclusion of the other states, There are no legal obligations per se, other than ones guided by international principles, not attacking and so on. Other people, meaning non-citizens and foreigners, no obligation, somewhat couched with human rights and others, but strictly speaking, you care less for them. And crucially, other beings, animals and plants, they are not part of this concept. Other areas beyond national boundaries, the global commons, or Earth as a whole, and other times. At the present, yes, but what about future generations of humans and other species? So something is deeply out of balance here. So the cooperation, this situation that we have, the model of negotiating and cooperating, is of course in practice severely hampered by so-called national interests. They are still being perceived as fundamentally different from global interests. So in other words, there's a lack of an overarching commitment to the common good and to global interests. Again, it may not be a description of the reality. We might well see movements, and of course we have made progress with 30 years of international environmental law, and yet we keep failing. My metaphor often is that we are capable to save some trees, but we are losing the forest, because we don't have a fundamental legal obligation to do so. And if there is such a thing as a rule of law that we are all educated by, and that without which we couldn't live in peace and security with each other, we would not, without the understanding of legal obligations and the rule of law, we will not be overcoming our current calamity of negotiating deals, where we can only say, fundamentally to be protected. Think of human rights for a moment. Luckily, human rights are being acknowledged as fundamental and non-negotiable, legally speaking. But we are not there with the environment yet. So laws, we could say, has been said many times before, are really largely designed around competing property rights, rather than around the commons also, or a good balance between the commons with responsibilities and property rights. It's rather lopsided. To continue the story, who owns the earth, and just throw some other numbers around, the three richest people in the United States, these gentlemen here, all very familiar, represent $286 billion worth in the United States, which is pretty much half of what the rest of Americans have to make do with. Or there happen to also be the three richest people in the world, and this is then the equivalent, what they own, of more than the combined annual GDP of 47 countries. This is just another flavor of, speaking of ownership, power and control. Nothing personal here. We know enough about Bill Gates and his, antropathy and his goodwills and so on. But these are structural issues we are dealing with. Or look at the world's 11 richest countries. This is the current list. Korea on rank 11. Combined, these 11 countries have the equivalent of GDP of the remaining 185. The point being, these 11 plus maybe another 10, 15, they pretty much run the show. Let's face it, they pretty much define what the world can bear and what can't be done. Because, and they feel just legitimized to do so, whether it's China or Europe or the United States, they represent growing economies, big economies. They represent power, in other words. And therefore, studies have been done analyzing the contents of climate deals, including Paris Agreement, and to take a closer look at negotiation. I just come back from the United Nations 2 weeks ago. We tried to negotiate or help with negotiation a new ocean treaty within the UNCLOS, United Nations of the Sea framework. The same game is going on. Of course, the big players always have the biggest say. And you can sort of almost personalize it. You know exactly what Americans are going to say. They're not interested in ocean integrity. The Pacific Island states are. I happen to work with them. They, of course, have other ideas. And we might be ending up with a regional treaty, hopefully one day, that takes a so-called one ocean approach based on the rights of the ocean. So that's something quite real that we are trying to pursue. This is a concept of taking the oceans at the center of our concern, if you like, an expression of trusteeship. That might be a regional possibility for the South Pacific. So fundamentally in this situation, right, where we are left with some puzzlement in terms of ownership of Earth, right, or how we sort of relate to our home, we should be really reclaiming Earth. And from a legal perspective, the good news is that the discipline of environmental law has really changed somewhat over the last 10, 15 years. I can say from personal experience, I'll give you some examples in a minute. Environmental law scholars, they don't believe in this kind of inbuilt structure that sovereign states are the ones who decide for us, but rather believe in democracy and rather believe in agreements to fundamental legal obligations. Something that we know from our domestic situation needs to be reoccurring globally. So we are seeing a shift, if you like, of thinking from a state-centered concept of lawmaking to an earth-centered concept actually occurring. And notions like earth law and ecological law are quite familiar. Acknowledging here our annual gathering, there's about 250 environmental law professors around the world that happen to meet virtually once a year or sometimes more often, but this is our habit, the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law. We, 3 years ago, had a workshop on what later became known as the Oslo Manifesto, namely to define the shift from environmental law to ecological law. Some 100 environmental law professors adopted the Oslo Manifesto, and very briefly, this is what it is about. I will only sort of briefly indicate the first 4 points, and then 5 and 6, and leave it at there. The observation that 50 years of environmental law have really not worked. There are many reasons for that. They've not been able to stop ecological degradation. Many reasons, of course, has to do with legal training, with the way how law schools work, with the way how the law operates. Most laws are around property and only some laws are around the environment, but there are also structural deficiencies, such as an insufficient philosophy, ontology, and methodology of the very understanding of what environmental law is trying to achieve. Of course, roots in Western anthropocentrism, dualism, individualism, and utilitarianism. I take it for granted, with everyone being familiar with this phenomenon, how reductionist our traditional approach really has been, based on peculiar European assumptions. Ecologically blind and competing with property and corporate rights, and crucially, this what we sort of were seen as a logical antithesis. The ecological approach is based on egocentrism, so Earth matters because she's there and not because she's useful for us. The acknowledgement, you could say, of physical realities, so we don't even have to employ ethics in that context, but in the context of this notorious human-centered thinking that dominates the Western world and now dominates its global scale. It is ridiculous and certainly desirable to overcome it and take a ecocentric, holistic, and strong sustainability approach. At its core, ecological integrity is a fundamental principle of law, as indicated with Article 7 of the Rio Declaration. It appears, by the way, in some 27 international agreements. The notion that states should cooperate in order to protect the integrity of Earth's ecological systems. The language is there, it's just that it hasn't made any iota of a difference yet. So, with this mandate of the Oslo Manifesto, we started a platform called Ecological Law and Governance Association, serving all those wonderful local and national groups around the world. We see ourselves as really facilitating dialogues. We meet on a regular basis. Back then we were launched in October 2017 in Siena and Montreal at the same time. I want to acknowledge in this context this wonderful lady here. Many of you will recognize her, Polly Higgins. Polly Higgins was a wonderful, wonderful person, personally an amazing environmental scholar, the leader of the ecocide movement, highly influential among an entire generation of young environmental law students, who was with us in ELGA at the founding, and more recently in December 2018 when we launched the Hague Principles in the Peace Palace in The Hague. She passed away recently, very suddenly out of from cancer. A wonderful person who is no longer with us, and yet of course she is, and we all make it a commitment that we, in everything we do and think, we will honor her amazing legacy that she has left behind. The ELGA is a framework organization and coordinates a number of projects, and this is one of them. And the Earth Trusteeship Initiative has, of course, its own dynamics. It's really big. It started a few years ago, 2 years ago, and has now the loose membership or association of some 120 civil society organizations and 200-300 individuals as lawyers and scientists. It's a collaboration between Earth Charter International, ELGA for short, that I just introduced, the Common Home of Humanity, a science-based Earth system approach, global network, IUCN, World Commission on Environmental Law, WWF, Networks of Institutions for Future Generation, World Future Council, and 40 others. The adoption of the Hague Principles for a Universal Declaration on Responsibilities for Human Rights and Earth Trusteeship occurred on the 10th of December 2018 to mark the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Again, Polly was one of our speakers at the launch. Before I just briefly say something about the Hague Principles, you might be curious enough to want to know what this got to do with Earth governance, but this is really an effort to articulate not just what trusteeship involves, but also how this relates to other areas of law, rights in particular, human rights, rights of nature, and also responsibilities. It's really an attempt to bring it all together, observing things like human rights are a Western invention. What about non-Western cultures where responsibilities are far more prominent, particularly indigenous peoples? So we need to relate human rights to responsibilities. And equally, if we take human rights seriously, hopefully we do, and governments we rely on to be protected, they need to take a trusteeship responsibilities for the validity and protection of human rights. Equally, states need to take trusteeship responsibility for the protection of Earth and its ecological systems. So we're trying to influence in the UN sort of system, if you like, in three ways. Of course, the current SDG process is part of it. There's the odd opportunity, and of course, as we go along with reviews taking place on a regular basis, and as we come closer to the 2030 target, it will be clear that something is missing in the SDG goals, as important as they are for themselves. The big question we have to ask ourselves, we like to make progress with SDGs, no doubt, by 2030, but will the world be more sustainable than today? I'm afraid not, and there are reasons why not. Because we are not giving enough emphasis to give climate change and the Earth as a whole enough priority. So we need to obviously be part of this discourse. There's also the proposal of a UN Earth Trusteeship Commission or Council. I won't say much more about it. This is something that we are gearing towards maybe in June 2022, when there is another Earth Summit likely to happen to celebrate 50 years of Stockholm, and associated with that also the Global Pact for the Environment, the French initiatives that you may have heard about, that currently is stalled, is not being further pursued because of a lack of consensus. In short, there was a lack of appreciation that we need a global pact of that nature, where we all have one treaty, a global treaty, outlining the key principles under which states need to be guided in order to, save the planet, if you like. As weak as the global pact in its own text is, and that's why we need to have a more say and more articulate exactly what we mean by trusteeship in the Earth system approach. It's nevertheless very precious, because UN has officially acknowledged the validity of the Global Pact text to be further investigated. And states so far have not said, no, not for us, thank you very much. They basically said, we give it another 3 years and come up with a political declaration maybe in mid-2022. The Hague principles here, I won't go them in too much detail, just to highlight, there are really only 3 principles. The document itself is much larger and of course accessible. I have also copies here, but the essence is really 3 forms of responsibility that we all have and our political institutions have. For the Earth, all human beings individually and collectively share responsibility to protect nature, of which we are an integral part, the integrity of the ecological system, Earth as a whole, home of all living beings. And here's the trusteeship component. Each state, individual, and the international community of states collectively acknowledge that they have and share responsibilities for nature in cooperation and in alliance with their citizens as equal trustees of Earth and the integrity of Earth ecological systems. Then responsibilities within the community of life. Again, the text is important. Human rights are grounded in our membership within the community of life, the Earth community, which qualifies what rights we are called on to honor and what responsibilities we have for each other and for nature. This, in essence, makes the link between human rights, human responsibilities, and responsibilities towards nature. And then, lastly, perhaps, responsibilities for human rights. All human beings are responsible for the protection of human rights and for affirming human rights in their ways of thinking and acting. Each state has a prime responsibility for the protection of human rights as a trustee of its citizens and all human beings. So we are offering a new chapter in sort of major efforts to frame or reframe our current thinking of fundamental values. Really, we are all very proud, and rightly so, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but we can't leave it at that. And this is an effort to really bring together those many other, by the way, declarations on responsibilities. We counted some 18 of them over the last 20, 30 years alone, where civil society groups, partly in cooperation with IUCN or UNESCO, worked towards those declarations. Well, we were trying to bring it all together in one document, and now it's a matter to call upon the United Nations to initiate a process and so on. Back to the core, just finishing off really, if you give me another 10 minutes just to pursue this legal argument of sovereignty and trusteeship, how do they go together? My colleague Aya Benvenisti from Cambridge University did some fabulous work, I have to say, funded by the European Union over the last 5-6 years. He has a very rich body of literature to show for how the concept of state sovereignty needs to be redefined in the light of global challenges. And in his instance, the most obvious case is human rights. There's a glaring, but in our context, a glaring misfit between the scope of the sovereign's authority and the sphere of the affected stakeholders. Obviously, we need to match the two. The phenomenon of states being absolute needs to be reconciled with their responsibilities to actually protect human rights as pre-state entitlements. Otherwise, no point having human rights. It should never be in the hands of the state to decide how much human rights you are being granted. Rather, the job of the state is to ensure that they are completely followed. So that has to be an important requirement, I feel, considering the many human rights violations that we are seeing day by day. Pretty much on the basis of, I'm the sovereign here, you can't really mess with me. And the protection mechanism we have for human rights is really weak, as we know. the Human Rights Council of the United Nations produces reports and so forth, but doesn't really have any kind of decision-making power. So there is a need for something a bit more fundamental to reconceptualize the states themselves rather than the United Nations. And therefore, the state should be considered as having fiduciary obligations towards citizens requiring protection of human rights and the natural environment. It has been said many times, and there's a rich body of literature, but still probably not widely known enough. The plea for the state as having fundamental fiduciary obligations towards human rights and the natural environment. Maybe three normative arguments in favor of the validity of this legally binding legal trusteeship obligation. After all, sovereignty, the sovereign is a creation of us. It's based on, the discourse of the last 200 years, pretty much since the Enlightenment, that we have autonomy as individuals. We have the right of self-determination individually and collectively, and the ways how we as human organizations, as society do it is by creating states. In other words, there's a mandate coming from the people. It's not even required to be a democracy. Of course, it helps enormously if you have a living democracy, but fundamentally, the construct of the state has this kind of democratic element to it. And therefore, the second argument is therefore that states in their collective responsibilities are agents of humanity as a whole. This is what we have decided by implication, by default. Not that we have been asked, certainly not countries outside Europe have never been asked. We just have to live with the reality of nation states. But what we can do, we are citizens, each of us is a citizen of a nation, of a country, we can insist that the cooperation needs to be occurring in a form that they are actually agents on behalf of us. And the mismatch that we understand each other, of course, instinctively as human beings. 90% of our values are very similar. You don't have to be a fan of the Earth Charter to see that, right? It's just we allow states to continue in a way as if states have an own life, and they can negotiate completely without considering us. And climate change is an example in case. And number three, the right to own, fundamentally is associated with responsibility. I'm only mentioning it because it's easily forgotten in the Western context, right? Philosophically, it was always clear, with freedom comes responsibility, with rights comes responsibility. Certainly living in New Zealand, I've been lucky enough to see the strong commitment of responsibilities in any community. Not because the Brits who went there are so enlightened. No, we were trained up by indigenous Maori. It's the other way around. We learn a lot from Maori. Community spirits is well and alive, and it's really a sense of obligation that we have for each other. So my plea is, from a Western perspective, and from the historical European perspective, we have a lot of learning to do and have to rephrase a number of assumptions that we are making about our current world of sovereign states. So therefore, concluding states must act as a trustee of humanity and Earth, as expressed in the principles. And lastly, but not least, very briefly, a reflection on this very special location that we are in. It is a fascinating phenomenon to see the DMZ as both the most militarized zone in the world, and equally, ironically, one of the biodiverse richest zones of the world too. Of course, there is always this need for overcoming this totally artificial separation between people. There's always the element of unification, and as a German, I know what is at stake there. And I'm not saying the Germans are all happy now. There's a lot of damage being done over the decades before. But of course, it's your right of self-determination. As a Korean people, you decide, right? And not some abstract governments here or there. Anyway, the DMZ is, of course, of great fascination for that double reason, as indicated. There have, of course, been efforts to create create these demilitarized zone in a different way. I won't go into the details of my paper itself, including efforts to, they have failed so far, but some regional districts are committed nevertheless to create a biosphere reserve, which I'm personally quite familiar with because Waiheke Island is a small island that I'm living on. We are in the process of applying for being recognized by UNESCO as a biosphere reserve. We need the approval of our government for that. This is likely to come because we have a rather progressive government. So I don't know what's possible here with a biosphere reserve. From my perspective, it would be a very significant step forward to recognize this as a zone that's co-governed by both governments and other people there, with a certain mission to preserve the integrity of the region, at the same time allow human development, and it might of course offer opportunities of settlements there. Nevertheless, the main importance would be the symbolism associated with it. And of course, I'm aware of the efforts to, especially this conference here, how do we shift from a DMZ to a peace and life zone. It seems to me that it would be of great relevance that to have conferences like this is of course in a matter of educating ourselves that there is incredible merit for both sides, for North Korea and South Korea, to attempt something that hasn't been done before, to really create a symbol, a very significant symbol of Earth trusteeship. That's what it actually would be. It would require a form of co-governance, where this region of DMZ is seen as perhaps of own legal entity, whether you say rights of nature or otherwise, the integrity of this ecological system, requiring trusteeship. An example in case is my adopted home country. New Zealand is the first country that has legislation in place recognizing rights of nature in the Whanganui River. Whether unique rights of nature is maybe debatable, and hopefully we have time to discuss it further, what we mean by rights of nature. But what it is interesting, of course, there's an opportunity to learn from the New Zealand experience. We do have co-governance. On the one hand side, the local people, partly Maori and partly other people, they have the legal obligation to speak on behalf of the river. I am the river is me. You have to have the well-being, the integrity of the river in mind. It's a pretty powerful position to be in, as if the river were a person. And then you negotiate whether farmers can continue to discharge their effluents and so forth. So there's a lot of learning going on, that's my point, and not just in New Zealand. And I'd just like to hope that this conference and the wonderful network of People for Earth, that you can make really the kind of difference which I like to envision as something, should it ever happen, but it's worth having a dream having, I'm sure, but should it ever happen, Korea would have been amazing. You would have been setting a symbol to the entire world, and I feel this would make a huge difference to the affairs and perhaps a major step further to Earth governance. Thank you very much.
감사합니다. 좀 더 충분히 시간을 갖고 강의를 들었으면 훨씬 좋았겠습니다만 시간상 제약이 있어서, 그런데 혹시 강의를 들으시고 좀 질문하시고 싶으신 게 있으신 분이 있으시면 플로어에서 이렇게 질문해 주셔도 좋고요. 여기 아까 책자에 끼어 있는 요 질문지에 써서 주시면 좋겠습니다. 혹시 질문 있으신가요? 너무 완벽한 강의에서 차츰 다음 세션이 있으니까요. 그러면 다음 세션 하면서 차근차근 진행하기로 하고요. 일단은 기조강연 순서는 이렇게 마치겠습니다.
네, 감사합니다. 저희도 가지고 있는 많은 질문에 대한 답변 또 방향도 제시를 해주셨고 또 새로운 질문들도 많이 생기게 해주시는 그런 의미 있는 기조 강연이었습니다. Thank you, Professor Bosselman, once again. 자, 이제 커피 브레이크에 앞서 제가 마지막으로 어제 만난 아주 특별한 분을 소개해 드리려고 하는데요. 제가 어제 잠깐 이 다이얼로그를 듣기도 하고 음식도 먹으면서 이렇게 간단하게 얘기를 나눌 수 있는 그런 시간을 가졌는데요. UN Harmony with Nature의 책임자이신 마리아 산체스 선생님이십니다. 이쪽에 앉아 계시는데요. 제가 어제 짧은 시간이었지만 느낀 게 저희와 같은 길을 걷고 있는 버시고 동지이신 분이구나라는 것을 짧은 시간이지만 정말 느낄 수 있었습니다. We briefly met yesterday, and we had I listened to her talk, and also we had some food. We talked over some things. It was very brief, but I could really feel that she was a friend, an ally, a real amigo walking the same path, and it was a real pleasure meeting you. And now that you know who she is and that she's here, please feel free to say hello and mingle, and we'll resume again at 4 o'clock. Thank you very much.